The Democratic whip is recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank the senator from New Jersey. During the course of one of his political campaigns, Abraham Lincoln's opponent said to him, "You've switched your position. You've reversed your position on an issue. You've changed on an issue." And Abraham Lincoln said, "It's true. You see, I'd rather be right some of the time than wrong all the time." Well, I learned that lesson, as many of us have who've served in Congress, when you vote for a measure and many years later have to reflect on whether it was the right vote. I voted for something called the war on drugs. It seemed like a sensible thing to do, and many joined me, black and white members of the House of Representatives. It was after the death of Lynn Bias, the Maryland basketball star who overdosed. And in a moment of panic over crack cocaine, we did something which was going to just make a very clear public statement. The penalty for crack cocaine was going to be 100 times the penalty for powder cocaine. 100 times. We're going to let America know, don't mess with crack cocaine. What a colossal failure it turned out to be. The price of crack cocaine on the street went down instead of up. The number of users on the street went up instead of down, and we filled the prisons of America over the next 10 years to a level we had never seen before, primarily with African Americans who had been convicted of possessing and selling crack cocaine. I realized, and I'm sure many others did too, it was a big mistake. It was an experiment that failed at the expense of many people and their families and their lives. So 10 years ago, I started out to try to change it. The 100-to-1 standard, in my mind, was indefensible. It didn't work, number one. Number two, there was no scientific evidence that crack cocaine was that much more dangerous than powder cocaine. So I set out to make it 1-to-1, where it should be. And I ran into an adversary by the name of Senator Sessions from Alabama. He didn't like the idea very much of my change, and after negotiation, long negotiations, we agreed to drop the standard to 18-to-1. I can't tell you the wisdom behind the number 18, but it was a compromise number. It changed a lot of things. Thousands of people in prison were able to leave early, and many had their sentences reduced. But it wasn't enough. We needed to go further, and it was clear when it came to mandatory minimums and 3 strikes you're out and all of the things that led to imprisonments, which were almost impossible to describe. We needed another bill. I joined with Senator Mike Lee, a very conservative Republican in the Senate, and we moved forward with the legislation. And others joined us as well, but we were stopped by one man who happened to be the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Chuck Grassley. Grassley said, "I don't like this bill," and came to the floor many times and gave speeches against the bill. So it came obvious to me, if anything was going to happen, I needed to win over Chuck Grassley. So I sat down with him and literally for one whole year negotiated changes in the bill, things I didn't want to give up, but part of the process to move us forward. And we came up with the First Step Act, and he proudly was the lead sponsor on it. And I was the co-sponsor, happy to be. And then we found an ally in the White House, Jared Kushner, who is open about the fact that his father spent time in prison and believed in reform. And we put together the First Step Act. And one of the first people I went to was Cory Booker, then a new senator from New Jersey, and said, "I want you to support this bill. Read it and tell me if you can." And you came back to me with several proposals. One of them was the incarceration of juveniles that you wanted to make sure would be changed in America. Several other worthy suggestions we incorporated in the bill, and you became part of the team. And the team was ultimately successful when, to the surprise of everyone in Washington, President Trump signed it into law, the First Step Act. So those who are skeptical that what we're about here cannot result in legislation have ignored the obvious, that something that occurred in the last year or two. With this White House, with this president, with a Republican majority in the Senate, we did something significant, and we can do it again, and we should. What we're talking about now with justice and policing is so obvious to the world. What has brought us to this point of this debate? I think 2 things have brought us here. Maybe we didn't see them coming. Videotapes and DNA. That's what brought us here, because it's no longer speculation as to what happened in a parking lot. It's no longer conjecture as to what happened at the side of a curb in Minneapolis. We see it. We see it, and we can't get the images out of our mind. A knee on the neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, just in case that sounds like a short period of time, Try kneeling, as Senator Kaine did at our moment of silence in the auditorium just a few weeks ago. Try imagining someone's knee on your neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Well, George Floyd lost his life in that period of time. And I think the image that sticks with me is not only that man begging for his life on the ground, but the image of the policeman who was being implored and begged by all the people around, take your knee off, let him breathe, and just look with those cold, hard eyes as he took the life out of that man. That image is something I'll carry for the rest of my service in life as images from the Wendy's parking lot in Atlanta, Georgia. All of these things have brought us to the moment where we realize something must be done. I listened, Senator Kaine, when you talked about the rally you attended in Richmond over the weekend. What a coincidence that you would talk about the young people who organized it. In my home state, I've been to several rallies in the city of Chicago by leaders in the community, religious and otherwise. But the meetings that I've attended that have had the most impact on me have been organized by high school students. In my hometown of Springfield, Nikela Henderson is a junior in high school. She's a tall young woman, kind of rangy, and doesn't look like the type of person would ever speak up for anything. But she and her twin sister, Nike, decided to put together a rally at the state capitol 2 weeks ago in Springfield. 1,500 people showed up. No windows were broken, no curses were thrown around, nobody was throwing anything. They made it clear it was going to be a peaceful rally, all about Black Lives Matter. I told her later, it's an amazing achievement at your stage in life that you were able to do this. And I thought, how unusual that it was a young woman, a young African-American woman, who took on this role of leadership with others. And then this last Sunday, I went to Jerseyville, Illinois. I was telling Senator Booker about this. I don't know if there are many, if any, black families in Jersey County. I represented this area for a long time, and I don't remember many. But they had a rally on the lawn next to the courthouse, 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. And I went down there because of another African-American high school young woman who named Leilani Davis. Leilani goes to high school about 20 miles away in Alton, and she called for a Black Lives Matter rally in Jerseyville and asked me if I'd come. I said I wouldn't miss it, because she'd done the same thing in Edwardsville, another small town, had a rally, and when they started cruising with banners supporting different political candidates and all the derision they were throwing at her, she said to these people, we're not going to be like that. We're not going to do that. This is going to be peaceful. I respect her so much for it. Here are these two 16, 17-year-old young African-American women who are true leaders and are inspiring in their humility. They're not looking for a headline. They wouldn't know what to do with it. And they're kind of wide-eyed at the number of people who are showing up. And the people who show up, by and large, are young people, white, black, brown people, who come there begging for freedom and liberty and hoping that we can do something in Washington. And why shouldn't we? Isn't it the reason we ran for these offices? To address the issues of the day in our time, to take on the tough chores of finding compromise when it looks like it's impossible? I think we can do this, and I know that we must. I want to just recount one other thing before I yield the floor. I see others are arriving here. It was about 10 days ago that I asked the African-American members of my staff to get on a conference call. We spend a lot of time on conference calls. And there were quite a few of them on the call, and I started talking about their experiences, and they were a little reluctant to volunteer much. And then the dam broke, and one of them said something that led another one to say something, and it turned out to be one of the best conversations I've ever had with my staff. They told me some things which I needed to hear, because listening is sometimes more important for a senator than speaking, although I do a lot of speaking. And I can recall, as so many of them described for me, the very first time, and they remember it, and they remember who said it, when they were called the N-word. They remember it. And they each went through that experience on a playground, in a school. And I'm thinking to myself, I never had an experience in my life that was that profound that I remember it to this moment as someone using a word against me. Another young woman talked about the fact that her mother sat her down at a young age and said, now listen to me. When you go in a store and buy something, you always ask for a receipt, Always ask for a receipt. And you put that receipt in that bag because somebody's going to stop you, girl, at the door and say, you stole that. And you can show them that you paid for it. You got the receipt. And I thought to myself, my mother never gave me that lesson. She didn't have to. I wasn't going to be stopped at the door. I'm white. And this young woman was black. Time and again, the stories they told reminded me that the issue of racism is one that we have faced in this country, as you said, for over 400 years when slavery came to our shores, before we were even known as the United States of America, to this day. And the greed and racism behind slavery still challenge us to this moment. Can we come up with an approach that is sensible? I hope we can. When you look at the history of Reconstruction, the Black Codes, Jim Crow, the Great Migration, and everything that followed, you realize that we're still in the midst of this debate. We are as drawn to it as any moment in American history, and we have to face it and face it squarely and honestly. I think that we can, and I think that we must. And let me say one word about the anti-lynching law. I read about the history of the anti-lynching law in the United States Congress, and I'm sure Senator Booker knows it well. A congressman from Missouri, Leonidas Dyer, he was not African American, he was a white congressman. He was a veteran of World War I and an attorney in St. Louis and a former prosecutor who just was outraged by the East St. Louis race riots. East St. Louis is my hometown, born and raised across the river. Outraged by the race riots there and the people who were killed, he introduced the anti-lynching law and managed to get it through the Senate, through the House rather, and then came over here and died in the Senate. And that measure has languished in this chamber ever since. I thought to myself, lynching, what a terrible Southern phenomena. Boy, am I wrong. I did a little research and study in history over the weekend. Saddened to learn that in my home county, St. Clair County, on the Belleville Square, an African American was lynched. Another African American lynched in Decatur, Illinois, a town that I've represented for years in central Illinois. And sadly, other lynchings that took place in parts of Illinois that you might not have guessed. I learned the history of Anna, Illinois. I won't say it on the floor because I don't want to put it in the record, but unfortunately the name Anna has some racial connotations to it, which I'll share privately with others. There was a lynching based on a person living in Anna. He was lynched in Cairo, Illinois. So it happened in the land of Lincoln. It happened in the North. It happened in my home state that I love. And it's a reminder that hatred can be found everywhere. And it's our job here with this bill to move forward and say to the good police, thank you for serving us. Now join us in making sure we don't have bad police. In your ranks, you know the people who cannot be trusted with their badge and gun to use it responsibly. You know the people who shouldn't be policemen. Join us in making sure that your ranks show real quality in the recruitment, in the training, in the review of performance of all those who are serving in law enforcement. We need to do so much more, and I'm sure there's much more that can be said, but I want to thank my colleagues Booker and Harris for bringing us to this moment. This is our moment. I would beg Tim Scott, whom I dearly love as a colleague and a person, to join us in a bipartisan effort to do something historic at this moment. Don't believe we can't do it, believe we can, and do the right thing that will stand the test of time. I yield the floor.